November 25, 1177. A 16-year-old boy with rotting flesh is about to face the most feared warrior in the Islamic world, commanding an army 20 times larger than his own. What happens next will defy every law of war, every calculation of odds, and become one of the most impossible victories in human history. But this story doesn't begin with triumph. It begins with death. The year is 1177, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem is dying. Not the slow, dignified death of old empires that fade into history books, but the violent, desperate kind where you can smell the smoke from burning villages, where mothers clutch their children and run toward city walls that might not hold, where every sunset could be your last. The Crusader states, those fragile Christian kingdoms carved out of the Holy Land nearly 80 years earlier, are crumbling. And standing at the gates, ready to deliver the killing blow, is a man whose very name makes hardened knights grip their swords a little tighter. Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub. You know him as Saladin. He's 39 years old, brilliant, ambitious, and he's just unified the fractured Muslim kingdoms under a single banner for the first time in generations. He commands the loyalty of Egypt, Damascus, and Aleppo. His armies are legendary. His tactical genius is unmatched. And right now, in late November of 1177, he's looking at Jerusalem like a wolf looks at a wounded lamb. But here's what makes this moment so devastating. Jerusalem isn't just wounded. It's practically defenseless. The bulk of the Crusader army, the fighting men who would normally stand between Saladin and the Holy City, they're not there. They're hundreds of miles north, laying siege to some insignificant fortress, completely unaware that while they're fighting over stones and dirt, the entire kingdom is about to fall. The timing couldn't be worse. Or from Saladin's perspective, it couldn't be more perfect. He's been waiting for this opportunity, and now it's here, served up like a feast. His spies have confirmed it. His scouts have verified it. Jerusalem is exposed. The roads are open. And he has 26,000 warriors ready to take what 3 crusades tried to protect. 26,000. Let that number settle in your mind for a moment. This isn't some raiding party or border skirmish. This is an invasion force massive enough to swallow cities. Cavalry units that can ride for days without rest. Archers who've trained since childhood. Infantry hardened by years of desert campaigns. The flower of Islamic military might, all moving in one direction. Toward Jerusalem. Toward conquest. Toward what Saladin believes is his destiny. The first villages fall without a fight. Farmers see the dust clouds on the horizon and they know what's coming. They abandon their fields, their homes, everything they've built, and they run. Those who don't run fast enough don't get a second chance. Saladin's army spreads across the countryside like a dark tide, and everywhere it touches, fire follows. This is psychological warfare as much as military strategy. Saladin wants the Christians to see the smoke. He wants them to hear the screams. He wants Jerusalem to watch its kingdom burn and understand that resistance is futile. By mid-November, refugees are flooding through Jerusalem's gates with stories that curdle blood. Entire families cut down on the roads. Churches torched with people still praying inside. Children taken as slaves. The elderly left to die in burning homes. And with each refugee comes the same message, the same terror-stricken whisper that spreads through Jerusalem's streets like plague. Saladin is coming. Saladin is coming. And there's no one left to stop him. Inside Jerusalem's palace, the mood is beyond desperate. It's apocalyptic. The noble lords, the merchants, the clergy, they're all gathered in frantic councils, voices rising, hands gesturing wildly, everyone talking over everyone else because they all know what's at stake. This isn't just about losing territory or paying tribute. This is about extinction. If Jerusalem falls, the entire Crusader experiment in the Holy Land ends. Every Christian in the region becomes a target. The holy sites, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre where Christ was supposedly buried, all of it passes into Muslim hands, possibly forever. The arguments rage back and forth. Some say negotiate, offer Saladin tribute, buy him off with gold and promises. Others say retreat, abandon the outlying areas, pull everyone behind Jerusalem's massive walls and pray they hold. A few foolish voices even suggest sending urgent messages to the army up north, begging them to abandon their siege and race back south. But everyone in that room knows the truth, even if they won't say it out loud. Messages take days to deliver and days to respond to. Armies take weeks to mobilize and march. And Saladin? Saladin is 3 days away. Maybe 2. Maybe less. And then, cutting through all that noise, all that panic and desperation, a voice speaks. Not shouting, not pleading, just steady, calm, quiet enough that everyone has to stop and strain to hear it. The voice belongs to a young man sitting in a chair that's too large for him, wrapped in white robes that hide most of his body, his hands covered in bandages that are stained with something that might be blood but isn't. His face, the parts you can see, is young, painfully young. He has blue eyes that should be looking at the world with teenage wonder, making plans about tournaments and marriage alliances and all the normal concerns of royal youth. Instead, those eyes have the weight of someone who's already counted his own days and found them wanting. His name is Baldwin IV of Jerusalem. He's 16 years old, and he's rotting alive. Leprosy. The word itself is a death sentence in the 12th century. It's not just a disease, it's a curse, a mark of divine disfavor, something that makes people recoil in horror even as they cross themselves and mutter prayers. It attacks the nerves first, stealing sensation from your extremities, so you don't feel the cuts and burns that accumulate until your fingers and toes begin to decay. Then it moves inward, destroying tissue, collapsing your face, turning your body into something that barely resembles human. The smell alone is enough to empty a room. Most lepers are driven from cities, forced to live in isolated colonies, ringing bells to warn healthy people of their approach. But Baldwin isn't most lepers. He's a king, and that changes everything. He was diagnosed at 9 years old, during a children's game when his tutor noticed he didn't react to pain the way the other boys did. For 7 years now, he's been living with the knowledge that his body is betraying him one nerve, one finger, one breath at a time. The physicians give him maybe 5 more years, maybe less. The disease is progressing faster than they hoped. Already his hands are becoming useless, twisted claws that can barely hold a pen, let alone a sword. His face requires constant veils in public to hide the damage. His legs are weakening. Soon he'll need to be carried everywhere. And eventually, inevitably, the disease will reach his vital organs, and that will be the end. Most people in Baldwin's position would have given up, would have retreated into prayers and preparation for death, handed power to regents, disappeared from public life to spare themselves and others the horror of watching the decline. But Baldwin isn't most people. He didn't ask for this crown, didn't ask for this disease, didn't ask to be born into a kingdom that requires strong warrior kings when he can barely grip a cup without dropping it. But he has the crown. He has the disease. And he has a kingdom that's about to die unless someone does something. So when the nobles finish their panicked arguments about negotiation and retreat and desperate messages, Baldwin speaks. And what he says stops every heart in that room. We march. 2 words. That's all. But the silence that follows them is deafening. March? March where? March with what army? March with who exactly? Because in case the young king hasn't noticed, there is no army. It's all up north, hundreds of miles away, completely unreachable. One of the lords, emboldened by fear and frustration, actually laughs. A short, bitter bark of disbelief. March, your majesty? With respect, march with whom? We have perhaps 300 knights in the city. Saladin has 26,000 warriors. This isn't courage, it's suicide. The other nobles murmur agreement. This is madness. The boy king has finally broken under the pressure. His disease has reached his mind. Someone needs to take control before he gets everyone killed. But Baldwin doesn't flinch, doesn't raise his voice. He simply turns those ancient eyes toward the speaker and asks a question that changes everything. Would you rather die defending your homes, or die hiding behind walls, waiting for Saladin to starve you out or breach the gates? Because make no mistake, we are going to die. The only question is whether we die like cornered rats or like men. The room goes silent again, but it's a different kind of silence now. Because Baldwin has just stripped away every comfortable delusion, every hopeful fantasy. He's forced them to see the truth. They are going to die. Jerusalem cannot hold against Saladin's full might. The walls might buy them time, weeks, maybe months, but eventually those walls will fall. They always do. At least out there in the field they have a chance. A tiny, infinitesimal, probably suicidal chance. But a chance. It's the kind of logic that only makes sense when you're already dying. When you have nothing left to lose because fate has already decided your ending and all that remains is choosing how you meet it. Baldwin has been living with death as his constant companion for 7 years. These nobles, they're just now realizing their mortality, and it terrifies them. But Baldwin? Baldwin made peace with death a long time ago. Now he's just deciding how to use the time he has left. And then, as if summoned by Baldwin's determination, a figure steps forward from the shadows at the back of the chamber. He's tall, weather-beaten, wearing the distinctive white surcoat with the red cross that marks him as a member of the most feared military order in Christendom. His name is Odo de Saint Amand, and he's the Grand Master of the Knights Templar. If you don't know about the Templars, understand this. They are not normal knights. They're not fighting for land or glory or wealth. They're monk warriors who've taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But unlike regular monks, their obedience is to a single mandate. Kill the enemies of Christ without mercy, without hesitation, without surrender. They train every day, multiple hours, practicing cavalry charges and sword techniques until their bodies move by pure instinct. They eat together, pray together, die together. They're forbidden from retreating in battle unless outnumbered more than 3 to 1. And even then, many of them choose to stay and die rather than break their vows. In an age where most knights are essentially wealthy amateurs who fight maybe a few times in their lives, the Templars are professional killers. Religious fanatics with military discipline. And Odo de Saint Amand is their leader. He doesn't kneel to Baldwin. The Templars answer to the Pope, not to kings. But he nods, a gesture of respect between equals, and when he speaks, his voice has the flat, matter-of-fact tone of someone describing weather rather than potential apocalypse. The boy is right. We march. The nobles erupt again, but Odo talks over them, louder now, brooking no argument. You think hiding in Jerusalem saves you? Saladin will surround the city and starve you until you're eating leather and rats. And when you're weak enough, when you're desperate enough, he'll walk through these gates and take everything. Your gold, your homes, your wives, your children, everything. At least out there we can choose the ground. We can strike before he's ready. And we have something Saladin doesn't expect. He pauses, lets the question hang in the air until finally one of the younger nobles, curiosity overcoming fear, asks what that could possibly be. Odo's smile is not a pleasant thing. Surprise. And Knights Templar. I have 150 of the finest warriors in Christendom stationed in Jerusalem right now. Add your household knights, the garrison, every fighting man who can sit a horse, and we have perhaps 500 cavalry. Saladin has 26,000, which means he won't see us coming. Because who in their right mind would attack with those odds? And there it is. The insane logic that might, just might, be their only hope. Saladin expects negotiation or defense. He's planned for siege warfare, for a long, grinding reduction of Jerusalem's walls and morale. What he hasn't planned for, what he can't possibly expect, is for Baldwin to gather every fighting man in the city and ride out to meet him in open battle. It's so crazy it might actually work, or it might just mean dying slightly faster. But at least it's a choice. At least it's action. The nobles look at each other, look at their dying king, look at the Templar Grand Master with his scarred hands and dead eyes. And one by one, they nod. They'll march. They'll probably die. But they'll march. The next 24 hours are chaos. Every stable in Jerusalem is opened. Every sword is sharpened. Every knight gathers his armor, his weapons, his horse. The Templars move through the city like white ghosts, checking equipment, organizing supply wagons, bringing order to chaos. Baldwin's physicians beg him not to go. They warn him that the ride alone could kill him, that his body can't withstand this kind of stress. Baldwin tells them to prepare his horse and walks away while they're still talking. Because here's what those physicians don't understand. Baldwin is already dead. The leprosy has seen to that. He's just waiting for his body to catch up with reality. And if he's going to die anyway, he'd rather die doing something that matters. Something that might, against all odds, save his kingdom for a few more years. Something that proves he was more than just a diseased boy who happened to wear a crown. By sunset on November 24th, the army is assembled in Jerusalem's courtyard. It's not much to look at. 500 knights, maybe 1,000 infantry, a handful of supply wagons. Against any normal opponent, it would be a respectable force. Against Saladin's 26,000, it's a joke. A sad, desperate joke that's going to end in blood and screams. The people of Jerusalem line the walls, watching their protectors prepare to ride out. The women are crying. The old men are praying. The children are too young to understand they're probably watching their fathers for the last time. Baldwin rides through the assembled troops on his warhorse, and even though his body is failing, even though his hands shake as they grip the reins, even though everyone can see the bandages and smell the sickness, somehow he looks like a king. He stops before the Templars, 150 men in perfect formation, their white surcoats gleaming in the fading light. These are the men who will lead the charge. These are the men who vowed to never retreat. These are the men who might actually give them a chance. Odo de Saint Amand raises his sword in salute. Baldwin returns it as best he can with his ruined hands. And then the gates open, and 500 men ride out into the night, heading south toward an army they cannot possibly defeat, carrying with them the last hope of a dying kingdom. They ride through the darkness, following old Roman roads that cut through hills and valleys, past abandoned villages still smoking from Saladin's passage. The scouts range ahead, nervous, reporting back every hour with increasingly dire news. Saladin's army is massive. It's spreading out. It's confident. The discipline is breaking down as soldiers spread across the countryside to loot and burn. And that's when Baldwin's scouts bring him the most important piece of intelligence of the entire campaign. Saladin has made camp at a place called Montgisard, near a ravine and some rough terrain. And because he believes Jerusalem is defenseless, because he thinks there's no threat left to face him, he's allowed his army to scatter, to spread out across miles of territory, to lose their formation and discipline in favor of plunder and celebration. Saladin has made a mistake. Perhaps his first real mistake of the entire invasion. He's underestimated his enemy. And in warfare, underestimation is often fatal. Baldwin calls his war council. They huddle around a map by torchlight, and for the first time since this nightmare began, there's something other than despair in their eyes. It's not quite hope. Hope would be too strong a word. But it's possibility. Saladin's forces are scattered. His camp at Montgisard has his back to rough terrain. The ground between them and his position is perfect for a cavalry charge, a long slope that will let them build momentum. If they hit hard enough, fast enough, surprising enough, they might just break his center before he can organize a defense. And once an army breaks, once panic sets in, numbers stop mattering quite so much. Men start thinking about survival instead of victory. They run. They scatter. And in the running and scattering, they become easy prey for mounted knights who know how to kill. It's still insane. It's still probably suicide. But it's a plan. And it's better than anything else they have. Odo de Saint Amand studies the map, traces the route they'll take, calculates distances and timing. Then he looks up at Baldwin with those flat, emotionless eyes and says something that will echo through history. Tomorrow, we show Saladin what it means to face men who have nothing left to lose. The army camps that night in a small valley, still hidden from Saladin's scouts. No fires, no noise. Just 500 men who know that by this time tomorrow, most of them will be dead. They pray. They write letters to wives and children who'll probably never receive them. They check their weapons one last time. The Templars sit in perfect silence, already half in that meditative state where normal fear and normal concerns fall away, where there's only the mission, only the enemy, only the God they're about to meet. And Baldwin? Baldwin sits alone in his tent, his ruined hands clasped in prayer, talking to a God who gave him a crown and a curse in equal measure. He doesn't pray for victory. That would be too much to ask. He prays for courage, for strength to stay in the saddle when his body wants to fail, for the ability to give his men one last moment of leadership before the darkness takes him. And maybe, just maybe, for the chance to do something that will be remembered, to prove that even a dying boy can make a difference when everything is on the line. Dawn comes cold and clear. November 25th, 1177, the day that will decide everything. Baldwin's army forms up in the pre-dawn darkness, 500 knights in formation with the Templars at the point of the spear. Odo de Saint Amand rides along the line, checking positions, offering quiet words to the younger knights who look like they might vomit from fear. Baldwin takes his position at the front, next to the Templars, and even though his advisors beg him to stay in the rear, to let others fight while he commands from safety, he refuses. A king leads from the front, or he's not a king at all. The sun rises, burning away the morning mist, and suddenly they can see what they're facing. Below them, spread across the valley floor like a vast encampment, is Saladin's army. 26,000 men, scattered across miles of territory, tents everywhere, campfires still smoking from breakfast, horses grazing, men lounging, weapons stacked, armor removed. They look like an army that's already won. An army that has no idea death is coming. The Christian knights sit on their horses, looking down at that vast host, and even now, even with the element of surprise, even with perfect terrain and perfect timing, doubt gnaws at them. How can 500 men defeat that? How can this possibly work? But then Baldwin raises his sword, the morning sun catching the blade and turning it into a bar of light, and he speaks loud enough for every man to hear. Not a speech, just a simple statement of fact. Today we show them that faith and courage are worth more than numbers. Today we save Jerusalem, or we die trying. Either way, we will be remembered. And with those words hanging in the air, with the sun climbing higher and the enemy spread out below them like a feast waiting to be devoured, Baldwin lowers his sword in the signal to charge. The Templars surge forward first, 150 knights in perfect formation, moving as one unit, building speed, the ground shaking under thousands of pounds of armored horses and men. Behind them come the rest of the Christian cavalry, 500 lances lowering, 500 voices raised in a roar that splits the morning air. They thunder down the slope towards Saladin's unprepared, scattered, celebrating army. And in those few seconds, as the distance closes and the charge builds momentum, one impossible question burns in every mind, both Christian and Muslim, both living and those about to die. Can faith and desperation really overcome impossible odds? Can 500 men armed with nothing but courage and surprise really shatter an army 50 times their size? Or are they about to learn that sometimes, no matter how brave you are, no matter how righteous your cause, mathematics still wins? Comment below what year you're watching this from, and whether you think 500 knights can defeat 26,000 warriors. Because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about warfare, about courage, and about the thin line between victory and annihilation. The charge is thundering downhill and Saladin has no idea it's coming. Imagine for a moment what that means. 26,000 warriors, the finest military force the Islamic world has assembled in decades, spread across miles of Palestinian countryside, and not a single one of them knows that death is screaming toward them at 30 miles per hour. They're cooking breakfast, sharpening weapons, feeding horses, arguing over who gets to loot which village next. Some are still sleeping off the previous night's celebration, dreaming of the riches waiting for them in Jerusalem. And in approximately 90 seconds, 150 Knights Templar are going to crash into their center line like the fist of an angry god. But let's rewind for just a moment. Because to understand what's about to happen, to really grasp the sheer audacity and insanity of what Baldwin has just set in motion, you need to understand what a medieval cavalry charge actually is. This isn't some Hollywood fantasy where horses gallop gracefully and knights duel individually with choreographed precision. This is physics. This is mass multiplied by velocity, channeled through steel and flesh and absolute conviction. A fully armored knight on a warhorse weighs somewhere around 1,500 pounds combined. Now take 150 of those combinations, accelerate them down a slope to maximum speed, point them at a single location, and what you have is roughly 225,000 pounds of concentrated violence moving at the speed of a modern car on a highway. When that hits human beings, when all that force compresses into a single point of impact, bodies don't just fall. They explode. Bones shatter. Armor crumples. Men are literally thrown through the air by the concussive force. And this is before the Templars even start swinging their swords. The distance closes. 500 yards. 400. The sound is reaching Saladin's camp now, a deep rumbling thunder that makes the ground vibrate, that enters your chest before it enters your ears. The first Muslim soldiers to notice look up from their breakfast fires, confused. Is that an earthquake? A rock slide? And then they see it. White surcoats with red crosses, rising and falling like a tide of death flowing down the hillside. Lances lowering. The morning sun turning 500 metal points into stars of light. For one frozen second, the Muslim warriors don't react. They can't. The human brain isn't designed to process this kind of threat appearing from nowhere. It's the same instinct that freezes a deer in headlights, the momentary paralysis when reality shifts so violently that your mind simply cannot accept what your eyes are showing it. 300 yards. Men are scrambling now, reaching for weapons, screaming warnings that get lost in the thunder of hooves. Officers are shouting orders, but there's no formation to organize into, no defensive line to form. Saladin's army is scattered across miles. The men at the impact point, maybe 2,000 of them in the immediate vicinity, they're completely isolated from support. And they have approximately 30 seconds to prepare for an impact that would take 30 minutes to properly defend against. This is what happens when you underestimate your enemy. This is what happens when confidence becomes arrogance. Saladin believed Jerusalem was beaten. He believed no one would dare face him. And that belief is about to cost him everything. 200 yards. The Templars are in perfect wedge formation now, Grand Master Odo de Saint Amand at the absolute point, the tip of the spear. These men have trained for exactly this moment their entire adult lives. They've practiced the charge so many times that their bodies move by pure muscle memory. Knees grip the horse. Lower body becomes one with the animal. Upper body stays loose, ready to absorb impact, ready to swing the lance. Eyes focus on the target, tunnel vision eliminating everything except the enemy directly ahead. And the mind goes somewhere else. Somewhere cold and empty where fear cannot reach, where doubt cannot enter, where there is only the mission and the absolute certainty of righteous violence. 100 yards. Baldwin is riding with them, off to the side but still in the front line, and his body is screaming at him to stop. His hands have no feeling. His legs are going numb. The jolting impact of the gallop is agony on his decaying flesh. But he's holding his lance level, holding his position, and in this moment he is not a diseased boy king slowly rotting to death. In this moment he is every warrior who ever faced impossible odds and charged anyway. Every desperate defender of a dying cause. Every person who looked at certain death and said not today. Not without a fight. 50 yards. The Muslim soldiers at the impact point have formed something resembling a defensive line. Spearmen crouching with weapons braced. Archers loosing arrows that mostly miss because their hands are shaking and they're firing uphill at moving targets. A few arrows find homes in horses and men, but momentum is everything now. A charging warhorse doesn't stop because of one arrow. It doesn't even slow down. The animal's blood is up, its training kicking in, and once a destrier commits to the charge, once that massive beast decides it's running through whatever's in front of it, only death will stop it. 20 yards. The Muslim spearmen are bracing for impact. Some of them are praying. Some are screaming defiance. Some have already broken and are running. And then, in that final second before collision, Odo de Saint Amand does something unexpected. He laughs. A deep, joyous sound that carries over the thunder of hooves. Because this moment of pure violent certainty, this is what he lives for. This is the moment when all doubt falls away and there is only the enemy and the mission and the absolute clarity of purpose that comes from being exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to do. The Templars hit Saladin's line like a tsunami hitting a sandcastle. The sound is indescribable. Metal on metal, flesh on flesh, bones snapping, horses screaming, men screaming louder. The front rank of Muslim defenders doesn't just fall, they disintegrate. Lances punch through shields, through armor, through bodies. Men are lifted off their feet and thrown backward into their comrades. Horses bowl over entire groups of soldiers, trampling them into the mud. And the Templars don't stop. They don't even slow down. They crash through the first line, into the second, into the third, and suddenly they're in the heart of Saladin's camp, and there's nothing remotely resembling organized resistance anymore. There's just chaos, just panic, just thousands of men suddenly realizing that they're not the predators today. They're the prey. But here's what makes this moment truly devastating. The Templars aren't just attacking. They're destroying. These men have trained their entire lives for close-quarters combat on horseback, and they're moving through Saladin's scattered forces like professional butchers working through cattle. Drop the lance once it's buried in an enemy. Draw the sword. Swing from horseback using the animal's momentum to multiply force. Aim for heads, for necks, for any unarmored spot. Don't engage in prolonged duels. Kill and move. Kill and move. Kill and move. Every motion efficient. Every strike lethal. No mercy. No hesitation. No quarter given, because the Templar vows specifically forbid showing mercy to enemies of Christ. These aren't men fighting out of hatred or passion. They're professionals doing a job they've dedicated their lives to mastering. And the job is killing. Behind the Templars, the rest of Baldwin's force crashes into the widening breach. 400 more knights, less trained than the Templars but no less motivated, following that white wave deeper into Saladin's camp. The surprise is total. The shock is absolute. Muslim warriors are grabbing weapons and dying before they can use them. Tents are collapsing. Campfires are being scattered, starting spot fires across the camp. Horses are panicking and stampeding, adding to the chaos, trampling friend and foe alike. And through it all, like a white scythe harvesting wheat, the Templars keep driving forward, keep killing, keep pushing deeper into the mass of Saladin's army. Now here's the question you should be asking yourself. How is this possible? How can 500 men be winning against 26,000? Even with surprise, even with perfect terrain, even with the enemy scattered, the math still doesn't work. Right? Wrong. Because war isn't math. War is psychology. And right now, in these crucial minutes, psychology is destroying Saladin's army from the inside. Think about what's happening from the perspective of a Muslim soldier positioned half a mile from the initial impact. You heard thunder. You heard screaming. You saw men running toward you with terror on their faces, shouting about Christian knights appearing from nowhere. And now you're watching a wave of white-cloaked warriors cutting through your army like it's not even there. You can see the bodies. You can hear the screams. You know you should stand and fight. Your officers are screaming at you to form ranks, to organize a defense. But your brain, your ancient survival instinct, is screaming something else entirely. Run now. Because if you stay, you're going to die. And once that thought enters your mind, once fear really takes hold, discipline evaporates. Training evaporates. Loyalty evaporates. All that remains is the desperate animal need to survive. And survival means getting away from those white-cloaked demons who just appeared from hell itself. This is how armies break. Not because every soldier is killed, but because enough soldiers decide that death is preferable to whatever is happening over there. The panic spreads like ripples in a pond. One man runs, then 10, then 100. Then entire units are dissolving, throwing down weapons and shields because they're heavy and slowing you down, and right now speed is the only thing that matters. Speed and distance, and somehow getting away from the nightmare that has descended on this camp without warning. Saladin sees it happening. He's in his command tent when the attack begins, studying maps, planning his assault on Jerusalem, and suddenly his officers are bursting in with impossible reports. Christians. Attacking. At first he doesn't believe them. Cannot believe them. It's a probe. A small raiding force. It has to be. But then he emerges from his tent and sees his army collapsing before his eyes, sees the white surcoats driving through his center, sees the panic spreading, and he understands with perfect horrible clarity exactly what has happened. Baldwin has done the unthinkable. Baldwin has attacked. And Baldwin is winning. For Saladin, this moment is beyond military disaster. It's personal humiliation. He's the general who unified the Muslim world. The brilliant tactician who's never lost a major engagement. The man destined to reclaim Jerusalem for Islam. And he's being routed by a teenager with leprosy and a handful of knights who shouldn't even be here. His officers are screaming for orders. Form defensive positions. Rally the troops. Organize a counterattack. But Saladin, for perhaps the first time in his military career, doesn't know what to do. How do you organize a defense when your army is scattered across miles? How do you rally troops who are already running? How do you counterattack an enemy who appeared from nowhere and is now in the middle of your camp, killing with methodical efficiency? And the Templars just keep coming. They've punched completely through Saladin's center now, emerged on the other side, and instead of stopping to regroup, instead of consolidating their position, they wheel around and charge back through. Because this is the critical moment. This is when panic becomes rout. When rout becomes massacre. The Templars understand something fundamental about human psychology in combat. Once men start running, they rarely stop until they're miles away or dead. And every minute they keep applying pressure, keep appearing wherever resistance tries to form, keep killing anyone who looks like they might organize a defense. The panic deepens. The rout spreads. And Saladin's numerical advantage becomes meaningless because you can't fight with soldiers who won't stop running. Baldwin is in the middle of it all, and he's transcended pain. His body should have given up miles ago. The ride, the impact of the charge, the chaos of melee combat, all of it should have killed him or at least knocked him unconscious. But adrenaline is a remarkable thing. Terror is a remarkable thing. And the sheer desperate need to see this through, to know whether this insane gamble will actually work, that's keeping him upright in the saddle when by all rights he should be dead. He's not fighting like the Templars fight, with practiced efficiency and professional calm. He's fighting like a dying man with nothing to lose, swinging his sword with ruined hands, aiming for anyone in Muslim colors, screaming wordless battle cries that are half prayer and half curse. And around him, his kingdom is being saved by the most unlikely military victory in medieval history. Muslim units are dissolving everywhere now. Officers are abandoning their men. Elite cavalry units, the cream of Saladin's forces, are fleeing without engaging. The plunder they collected over days of raiding is being left behind in the mad scramble to escape. Weapons are being thrown away. Armor is being stripped off. Anything that slows you down is being abandoned because the only thing that matters now is getting away from those white-cloaked demons who seem to be everywhere at once, who never tire, who never stop, who kill with the mechanical precision of men who've done this so many times it's become routine. But it's not routine for them. For the Templars, this is the battle they've trained their entire lives to fight. This is the moment when faith and skill and absolute conviction transform impossible odds into victory. Grand Master Odo de Saint Amand is at the forefront still, his white surcoat now spattered with blood that isn't his own, his sword arm rising and falling with metronomic regularity, and he's not thinking about theology or salvation or anything abstract. He's thinking about the next enemy, the next threat, the next target that needs to be eliminated. This is what warrior monks are made for. Not peaceful contemplation in quiet cloisters. This violence. This righteous slaughter of God's enemies. This is their prayer. This is their worship. And they're going to keep praying until every enemy is dead or running. The rout is total now. What was once a 26,000-man invasion force is now a panicked mob fleeing in every direction, trampling each other in desperation to escape. The Templars have stopped charging and started hunting, breaking into smaller groups, pursuing fleeing Muslims, cutting them down as they run. No mercy, no prisoners. The Templar vows are very specific about this. Enemies of Christ do not deserve mercy. They deserve death. Clean, efficient, businesslike death. And the Templars are nothing if not businesslike. Saladin's bodyguard is trying to organize an escape route for their commander. They've brought up his fastest horse, a racing camel actually, because camels are faster over distance than horses, and right now distance is everything. Saladin is being physically lifted onto the animal by his officers while his bodyguards form a defensive perimeter, preparing to sacrifice themselves to buy their general time to flee. This is how completely the battle has turned. The man who rode into Palestine planning to conquer Jerusalem, who commanded the largest Muslim army assembled in decades, who was days away from crushing the Crusader Kingdom forever, is now fleeing for his life on a camel while his bodyguards die around him. But even in retreat, Saladin is a realist. He knows what this means. He knows what this moment will cost him in terms of prestige, momentum, credibility. Every enemy he's ever faced will hear about this. Every rival who wants his position will use this against him. The Christians will sing songs about this for centuries. But none of that matters if he's dead. So he flees. The great Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, the champion of Islam, flees from a 16-year-old leper boy and runs like a common soldier with fear in his heart and the screams of his dying army in his ears. The Christian knights see him going. They try to pursue, but Saladin's bodyguards are professional soldiers who know their duty. They throw themselves at the pursuing Christians, trading their lives for seconds, buying their commander time to open distance. A dozen men die to save one. It's the bargain of leadership in medieval warfare. The great general escapes while better men die for him. And Saladin is riding hard now, the camel eating up ground with that strange rolling gait, and behind him his army is being destroyed. Not defeated, not routed, destroyed. Turned from an invasion force into scattered groups of terrified men running in every direction, being hunted down by Christian knights who show no mercy because mercy is not part of their vows. The pursuit goes on for hours. Miles and miles of Palestinian countryside become a killing ground. Muslim soldiers are found hiding in caves, in ravines, under corpses. They're dragged out and killed. Some beg for mercy in broken Latin. Some offer money, jewels, anything. It doesn't matter. The Templars don't take bribes. They don't negotiate. They kill. That's their purpose. That's their calling. And today, God has given them a target-rich environment and they're not going to waste the opportunity. By late afternoon, when horses are finally too exhausted to continue, when even the Templars' bloodlust has been satisfied by sheer physical exhaustion, the killing finally stops. And the accounting begins. Baldwin sits on his horse overlooking the battlefield of Montgisard, and he can barely process what he's seeing. Bodies. Thousands of them. Scattered across miles of territory. Muslim warriors who woke up this morning expecting to celebrate their coming victory in Jerusalem and instead met death from an enemy they didn't even know was there. Broken weapons. Abandoned armor. The detritus of an army that ceased to exist. And his force, his 500 knights who rode out expecting to die in glorious futility, they're mostly intact. Casualties are remarkably light. Less than 100 killed. Maybe 200 wounded. Against an enemy that outnumbered them 50-1. It's not possible. It violates every principle of medieval warfare. It's a miracle. That's the only word that makes sense. A miracle. The Templars don't use that word. They're kneeling in prayer, thanking God for victory certainly, but to them this isn't miraculous. This is what happens when faith meets preparation, when skill meets opportunity, when absolute conviction meets an overconfident enemy. They trained for this. They prepared for this. They executed their doctrine perfectly. God may have provided the circumstances, but the Templars did the work. Still, even Odo de Saint Amand, who's seen more combat than most men see in 10 lifetimes, even he seems somewhat awed by what they've accomplished. 26,000. Scattered. Destroyed. By 500. The story will be told for centuries. And every time it's told, people will shake their heads in disbelief because the numbers just don't make sense. They can't make sense. Except they do. Baldwin is sliding off his horse now, or rather, he's falling. His body has finally given up. The adrenaline that's been keeping him upright for hours drains away all at once, and suddenly he's on the ground, his legs unable to support him. His attendants rush forward, terrified that their king has died, but Baldwin waves them away with hands that barely function. He's not dead. Not yet. But he's done. Finished. Whatever reserves of strength he had, he spent them all in the charge, in the fight, in the moment of absolute commitment when he chose to lead rather than hide. His white robes are stained with blood, mud, and other things he doesn't want to identify. His bandages have come loose, revealing the decay underneath. He probably looks like a corpse that forgot to lie down. But he's smiling, actually smiling, because against all odds, against all reason, against mathematics and military doctrine and common sense, they won. Jerusalem is saved. His kingdom survives. And he, the dying boy king that everyone pitied and some despised, he led the charge that made it happen. News of the victory spreads faster than any messenger could carry it. Refugees hiding in the hills see the Christian knights returning, see the Muslim army shattered and fleeing, and they start walking home. Villagers emerge from where they've been hiding to find their oppressors gone, fled, destroyed. The word spreads from village to village, valley to valley, until it reaches Jerusalem itself. And when the gates open and Baldwin's army rides through, when the people see their king alive, see their knights bloodied but victorious, see the evidence of impossible triumph, the city erupts. People are screaming, crying, praying, celebrating all at once. Church bells are ringing. Priests are declaring it divine intervention. Old women are crossing themselves and muttering prayers. Children are running alongside the knights, touching their horses, their armor, wanting to be part of this moment, this day when God reached down and saved Jerusalem through the most unlikely instrument imaginable. But in his chambers that night, being tended by physicians who shake their heads at what the battle has done to his already failing body, Baldwin knows the truth. This wasn't divine intervention. Or rather, it was divine intervention working through human agency, through careful planning and desperate courage and the willingness of 500 men to charge toward almost certain death because the alternative was worse. God may have been with them, but God works through people. And today, people did something extraordinary. The physicians are blunt. The ride, the combat, the stress, all of it has accelerated his disease. He has less time now. Maybe a year. Maybe 2 if he's lucky. The leprosy is progressing faster, eating away at his body with renewed appetite. Baldwin listens to their prognosis with the same calm he showed before the battle. Because here's what they don't understand. He was always going to die young. The disease decided that 7 years ago. The only question was whether his death would mean anything, whether his short, painful life would matter. And now he knows. It will. He saved Jerusalem. He led the charge at Montgisard. He proved that courage and faith and desperate determination can overcome impossible odds. That's his legacy. That's what will be remembered long after the leprosy has reduced him to dust. But there's one piece of news that tempers the celebration. One fact that keeps Baldwin from completely embracing the victory. Saladin escaped. He's wounded, humiliated, his army destroyed, his reputation damaged, but he's alive. And as long as Saladin lives, the threat remains. He'll rebuild. He'll learn from this defeat. He'll come back stronger, more careful, more dangerous. This victory bought Jerusalem time. Years, probably. But it didn't end the war. It didn't eliminate the threat. It just postponed the reckoning. Reports are already coming in about Saladin's escape. He rode for days on that racing camel, barely stopping, finally reaching Damascus more dead than alive. His advisors gathered around him, expecting rage, expecting him to execute someone for the disaster. But Saladin surprised them. He didn't rage. He didn't blame. He simply asked for accurate casualty reports and then withdrew to his chambers to think. Because Saladin is many things, but he's not a fool. He understands what happened at Montgisard. He underestimated Baldwin. He assumed the Christians were beaten. He let his army grow complacent, scatter, lose discipline. And he paid the price. Every principle of warfare he knows was violated, and the result was catastrophe. It's a lesson he will never forget. The next time he faces the Christians, he will be prepared. He will be cautious. He will respect their capability for desperate courage. And when that day comes, the outcome might be very different. In Jerusalem, as the celebrations continue into the night, as wine flows and songs are sung and priests offer prayers of thanksgiving, Baldwin sits alone in his chambers and thinks about the future. About the kingdom he's saved but cannot keep forever. About the disease that's claiming him piece by piece. About Saladin, somewhere in Damascus, nursing his wounds and planning his return. This victory is magnificent, improbable, worthy of songs and legends. But it's not the end. It's barely even a pause. The war continues. The threats remain. And Baldwin's time is running out faster than ever. The Battle of Montgisard will be remembered as one of history's most stunning military upsets. 500 against 26,000. David versus Goliath with steel and horses instead of slings and stones. Historians will debate for centuries how it was possible, what factors contributed, whether divine intervention played a role, or whether it was simply perfect tactics meeting perfect conditions meeting desperate courage. But for the men who were there, who charged down that slope knowing they would probably die, who crashed into Saladin's army and broke it against all odds, there's no debate. They know what made it possible. Faith, preparation, desperation, and a dying boy king who chose to lead rather than hide, to fight rather than negotiate, to risk everything on one impossible charge because the alternative was watching his kingdom die without ever truly living. But here's the question that should haunt you as you imagine that battlefield, as you picture those 500 knights facing 26,000 warriors, as you see Baldwin with his ruined hands gripping a lance he can barely hold. What would you have done? If you were there in Jerusalem, hearing reports of Saladin's massive army approaching, knowing that defense was probably futile and attack was certainly suicidal, what choice would you have made? Would you have ridden with Baldwin into almost certain death? Or would you have counseled negotiation, retreat, anything except the insane gamble that somehow, miraculously, worked? Because that's the real lesson of Montgisard. Sometimes the impossible only stays impossible until someone is desperate enough, brave enough, or crazy enough to try it anyway. And sometimes, just sometimes, the impossible becomes real. So the impossible happened. 500 men shattered an army of 26,000. Jerusalem was saved. Baldwin lived. Saladin fled. Victory achieved. Story over. Right? Wrong. Because here's what the songs don't tell you. Here's what the medieval chroniclers conveniently left out when they wrote about miracles and divine intervention and glorious Christian triumph. Victory has a price. And someone always has to pay it. December 1177. 3 weeks after the Battle of Montgisard. Jerusalem is still celebrating, but the celebrations have taken on a different tone. The initial euphoria, that explosion of relief and joy and disbelief when the army returned victorious, that's faded into something more subdued, more real, because the casualties are being counted now. Not the enemy casualties, those are simply staggering, somewhere between 15 and 20,000 Muslim warriors dead or scattered, the single bloodiest day in Saladin's entire military career. No, the Christian casualties. And while the numbers are small compared to what they faced, 93 knights killed, 217 wounded, behind each number is a story. A family destroyed. A widow created. Children who will grow up without fathers. Estates that will pass to younger sons or distant relatives. The price of victory, calculated in broken families and empty chairs at dinner tables. But there's another casualty that no one wants to talk about. The one that matters most. Baldwin himself. The 16-year-old king who led the charge, who held his lance with hands that had no feeling, who stayed in the saddle through sheer force of will when his body was screaming at him to stop. The battle broke him. Not spiritually, not emotionally, but physically. The leprosy that was already eating him alive found fresh purchase in a body pushed beyond all reasonable limits. The physicians are blunt about it now. Before Montgisard, Baldwin had maybe 5 years left, possibly more if the disease progressed slowly. After Montgisard? 2 years. Maybe 3. The stress, the exertion, the trauma of combat, all of it accelerated his decline. He saved his kingdom by sacrificing what little time he had left. And everyone in Jerusalem knows it. They see him now, being carried through the palace in a litter because his legs can no longer support him. They see the bandages that cover more of his body each week as the rot spreads. They see a boy king dying in installments, purchasing each day with pieces of himself. Is that a fair trade? Your life for your kingdom? Your future for everyone else's present? Baldwin thinks so. At least, that's what he tells his advisors when they beg him to rest, to stop holding court, to let regents handle the daily business of ruling while he focuses on his health. But Baldwin knows something they refuse to accept. There is no focusing on his health. There is no recovery. There is only the slow countdown to an end he can see approaching with crystalline clarity. So he rules. Every day that he can sit upright, he holds court. Every decision that needs a king's authority, he provides it. Every moment that he can be the king rather than the dying boy, he seizes it. Because legacy is the only immortality a mortal man can achieve. And Baldwin is determined that his legacy will be more than just the diseased king. More than just the leper boy who shouldn't have ruled. He will be remembered as the king who saved Jerusalem when no one else could. But what about Saladin? What happened to the great Muslim general after his humiliating defeat? Did Montgisard break him? Did it end his ambitions? Did he slink away into obscurity, his reputation destroyed by a teenage leper and a few hundred knights? Not even close. And this is where the story gets complicated. Because history isn't a fairy tale where the hero wins and everyone lives happily ever after. History is messy and ongoing and full of consequences that ripple outward in ways no one can predict. Saladin reaches Damascus in early December, riding into the city under cover of darkness because he doesn't want anyone to see him like this. Wounded, exhausted, riding a camel because his warhorse was killed under him during the retreat. The guards at the gate don't even recognize him at first. This can't be the great Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, unifier of the Muslim world. This is just a broken man on a tired animal, looking like he's been through hell and barely escaped. But it is him. And the news of what happened at Montgisard has beaten him home. The city knows. His court knows. His enemies certainly know. The whispers have already started. Saladin the Invincible, defeated by a child. Saladin the brilliant tactician, outsmarted by a dying boy. Saladin the champion of Islam, scattered by Christian dogs. The whispers are poison. They're everywhere. And they're not entirely wrong. His advisors gather for an emergency council, and the mood is dark. Some are arguing for his removal. A general who loses 20,000 men in a single day, who allows his army to be surprised and routed, who barely escapes with his life, does he deserve to continue leading? Others are more practical. Saladin may have lost a battle, but he's still the man who unified Egypt and Syria. He's still the most capable military leader in the Muslim world. One defeat doesn't erase a career of victories. And besides, who would replace him? What rival could command the same loyalty, the same resources, the same respect? The debate rages for hours, voices rising, accusations flying, and Saladin sits through all of it in silence. Just listening. Just absorbing. Just thinking. And then, when everyone has exhausted themselves with argument, Saladin speaks. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a simple statement of fact that silences the room. I underestimated them. It will not happen again. That's all. No excuses. No blame shifted to subordinates. No elaborate explanations about terrain or surprise or divine intervention. Just acknowledgement. Just acceptance. Just the cold, hard recognition that he made mistakes and those mistakes cost him an army. The room goes quiet. Because this is not what medieval generals do. They rage. They execute scapegoats. They spin elaborate narratives about betrayal or bad luck or God's will. They do anything except accept personal responsibility. But Saladin is not most generals. He's better than that. Smarter than that. And he understands something fundamental about leadership. The only way to learn from defeat is to acknowledge it honestly, to dissect what went wrong without flinching, to extract every lesson even when those lessons are painful. Over the following months, Saladin does exactly that. He rebuilds his army, but differently this time. More discipline, better intelligence gathering, stricter command structures that prevent forces from scattering the way they did at Montgisard. He studies the Templars, learns everything he can about their tactics, their training, their strengths and weaknesses. He reads reports about Baldwin, about the Christian kingdom's resources and limitations. He becomes obsessed with understanding his enemy because Montgisard taught him that underestimation is fatal. And slowly, methodically, patiently, he prepares for the next confrontation. Because there will be a next confrontation. Jerusalem may have won the battle, but the war is far from over. Back in Jerusalem, Baldwin is having the same realization. Montgisard was magnificent. Montgisard was miraculous. Montgisard bought them time. But it didn't solve the fundamental problem. The Crusader Kingdom is still outnumbered, still surrounded, still dependent on reinforcements from Europe that come irregularly if they come at all. And Saladin is still out there, wounded but alive, humiliated but learning. The next time they meet, Saladin will be prepared. The element of surprise will be gone. The perfect terrain won't present itself. The enemy won't scatter and panic. It will be a real battle, a grinding, brutal contest between forces that know each other's capabilities. And when that day comes, Baldwin knows he won't be there to lead his army. He'll be dead, consumed by leprosy, buried in whatever tomb they prepare for leper kings. But here's the part where the story gets dark. The part where you realize that sometimes courage and determination aren't enough. Sometimes the hero saves the day only to have everything fall apart after he's gone. Because without Baldwin, Jerusalem comes apart. The succession is contested. Rival factions fight for control. The unity that Baldwin maintained through sheer force of personality disintegrates into petty squabbling and power struggles. And Saladin, watching all this from Damascus, sees his opportunity. In 1187, 2 years after Baldwin's death, Saladin invades again. But this time there's no surprise attack. No desperate cavalry charge. No miracle at Montgisard. This time Saladin is prepared, his army disciplined, his tactics flawless. And this time, at a place called the Horns of Hattin, he destroys the Crusader army completely. The Battle of Hattin is everything Montgisard wasn't. A grinding, brutal defeat where the Christians fight bravely but lose anyway because numbers and preparation overcome desperation. Thousands of Crusader knights are killed or captured, including the Grand Master of the Templars who fought so brilliantly at Montgisard. Jerusalem, that city Baldwin died defending, falls to Saladin 3 months later. Not through miracle, not through impossible odds overcome, but through the simple mathematics of warfare when one side has everything and the other has nothing left to give. The Crusader Kingdom doesn't end that day, but it's mortally wounded. Within a century, the last Christian strongholds in the Holy Land will fall. The Crusades will end. The experiment will be over. So what's the point of the story? If Baldwin saved Jerusalem only for it to fall a few years later, if his sacrifice bought nothing but borrowed time, if Saladin ultimately won and the Crusader Kingdom ultimately fell, what was the point of Montgisard? What was the point of 500 men charging 26,000? What was the point of a dying boy king staying in the saddle when his body was begging him to stop? Here's the point. Legacy isn't measured in permanence. Nothing is permanent. Every kingdom falls. Every empire crumbles. Every person dies and everything they built eventually returns to dust. That's not pessimism. That's just reality. But the fact that nothing lasts forever doesn't mean nothing matters. Baldwin bought his kingdom 8 more years. 8 years where thousands of people lived in relative peace instead of slavery or death. 8 years where pilgrims could visit holy sites. 8 years where families could grow crops and raise children and live normal lives. Is 8 years worth a lifetime? Baldwin thought so. The men who charged with him at Montgisard thought so. And maybe they were right. But there's something else, something more important than the temporary reprieve Baldwin won. He proved something fundamental about human nature. He proved that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite fear. He proved that leadership isn't about physical strength or perfect health. It's about making hard decisions when easy ones would doom everyone. He proved that sometimes the impossible only stays impossible until someone tries it anyway. And most importantly, he proved that how you face death matters more than death itself. Everyone dies. Not everyone chooses how. Baldwin chose. He chose to lead rather than hide. To fight rather than negotiate. To spend his last moments saving others rather than pitying himself. That choice, that example, that story, it survived. It inspired. It mattered. 850 years later, people still tell the story of the Leper King who saved Jerusalem. Still marvel at the Battle of Montgisard. Still ask themselves what they would have done in his position. The Templars who fought at Montgisard, those survivors who lived through the impossible victory, they carried that battle with them for the rest of their lives. They told the story to younger knights. They passed down the tactics. They kept the memory alive. And even after Hattin, even after Jerusalem fell, even after the Templar order itself was eventually destroyed by politics and jealousy and the church's fear of their power, the story remained. 500 against 26,000. Faith and courage against impossible odds. A dying boy leading from the front when everyone expected him to hide in the back. That story became legend. And legends, unlike kingdoms, sometimes do last forever. So here we are, in 2024, nearly a millennium removed from that November morning when Baldwin IV looked down at Saladin's army and made his choice. The kingdom he saved is gone. The disease that killed him has been cured by modern medicine. The religious conflicts that drove the Crusades have evolved into different but no less intractable problems. Everything specific to that moment has changed. But the fundamental questions remain. What would you do when facing impossible odds? Would you choose courage or safety? Would you lead or follow? Would you spend your last moments on something meaningful or waste them in comfortable despair? Those questions don't age. They don't become obsolete. They're as relevant now as they were in 1177. And the answer Baldwin gave, the answer proven on the slopes of Montgisard, it's still available to anyone brave enough to claim it. Sometimes courage is enough. Sometimes desperate action beats careful planning. Sometimes 500 can defeat 26,000 if they want it badly enough and refuse to accept the mathematics of defeat. The Battle of Montgisard stands as one of history's most improbable military victories. Historians still debate exactly how it happened. Some credit the Templars' superior training and discipline. Some point to Saladin's overconfidence and poor positioning. Some invoke divine intervention because the numbers seem too impossible otherwise. Probably it was all of those things combined with perfect timing and desperate necessity. But at the center of it all was a 16-year-old boy with a disease that was eating him alive, who looked at certain death and charged anyway. Who led from the front when he could barely hold a lance. Who traded years of his life for a kingdom's survival. That's not just military history. That's a statement about what humans are capable of when they refuse to be limited by circumstances, by disease, by odds, by the reasonable expectations of reasonable people who've never faced an unreasonable situation. Baldwin IV died young. He died painfully. He died watching his body betray him piece by piece while his mind stayed sharp and aware, trapped in flesh that was becoming a prison. He never had a normal life. Never married. Never had children. Never experienced most of the things we consider essential to human happiness. But he had Montgisard. He had that one perfect moment when everything aligned and the impossible became real. He had the knowledge that his short, painful life mattered, that he saved thousands of people who never knew his name, that his courage inspired others to find their own. And when death finally came for him in that palace room in Jerusalem, when the leprosy finally won the war it had been fighting since he was 9 years old, Baldwin could face it knowing he hadn't wasted his time. He'd spent it, all of it, on something bigger than himself. That's the real lesson of Montgisard. Not that faith guarantees victory. Not that courage always wins. Not that one person can change the world forever. But that one person in one moment can make a choice that echoes through centuries. Can inspire others. Can prove that circumstances don't define limits, people do. Can show that how you face impossible odds matters more than whether you overcome them. Baldwin lost his war with leprosy. He couldn't save that. But he won his war with despair, with self-pity, with a temptation to give up because the ending was already written. He chose to matter. And that choice, made by a dying boy on a battlefield in 1177, still matters today. So let me ask you one final question, and I want you to really think about this. Not just acknowledge it and move on, but actually sit with it for a moment. If you knew you had limited time, if you knew your life would be short and painful and end badly, would you spend that time hiding from the pain? Or would you find something worth charging toward, something worth leading toward, something worth dying for? Because that's the choice Baldwin made. That's the choice the men who rode with him at Montgisard made. And that choice is still available. The circumstances change. The enemies evolve. The battlefield moves from Palestinian hillsides to whatever challenges you face in your own life. But the fundamental question remains. Will you charge? Or will you hide? Comment below your answer. Tell me what year you're watching this from and whether you think you'd have the courage to charge with Baldwin. Tell me what impossible odds you're facing and whether this story changes how you see them. Tell me if you think 8 years of life bought at the cost of everything is worth it. And while you're down there in the comments, hit that subscribe button because we're going to keep exploring these forgotten stories, these impossible moments, these times when ordinary people did extraordinary things and changed history in ways both large and small. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about Baldwin. Someone facing their own impossible odds. Someone who needs to know that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about being terrified and charging anyway. This is history. This is legend. This is the story of how a dying boy saved a kingdom and proved that sometimes, just sometimes, 500 is enough. I'll see you in the next story.